The backfire effect is one of the most fascinating and revealing dynamics in modern politics, a reminder that actions taken with confidence and calculation can swiftly turn against those who initiated them. When Republicans attempt to engineer political schemes meant to secure power, silence critics, or shift public opinion, the strategies may initially appear clever or even unstoppable. But beneath the surface, flaws begin to show, and the very tactics designed to create an advantage become the seeds of failure. In today's hyper-connected world, where every word, vote, and maneuver is scrutinized, the margin for error is slim, and when missteps occur, the consequences strike almost immediately. What was meant to be a show of strength transforms into a vivid display of weakness, and instead of gaining momentum, the scheme backfires, creating ripples of embarrassment and backlash that extend far beyond the original plan. The idea of instant karma in politics resonates deeply because it reflects an almost poetic justice. The Republican Party, often relying on strategies of obstruction, aggressive messaging, or manipulative framing, finds itself caught in a cycle where those very approaches backfire. For example, when an effort to discredit opponents turns into a platform for those opponents to strengthen their voices, the effect is not only counterproductive but humiliating. What begins as a bold attempt to project dominance quickly shifts into a narrative of miscalculation. In such moments, the backfire effect does not simply undermine a single policy or statement, it undermines credibility, creating long-term repercussions that no quick spin or talking point can repair. At the heart of this phenomenon is the overconfidence that drives many political maneuvers. Republicans often act under the assumption that the public will accept a narrative without question, that media cycles can be controlled, or that allies will remain loyal in the face of controversy. Yet history shows that overconfidence is a dangerous foundation. When evidence emerges, when journalists dig deeper, or when the public refuses to be misled, the scheme collapses under the weight of its own dishonesty. Instead of strengthening their position, Republicans end up reinforcing the very criticisms they sought to dismiss. The irony is inescapable. Attempts to manipulate only highlight the manipulation, and attempts to silence critics only amplify their voices. The backfire effect is also amplified by the speed of modern communication. In the past, a political misstep might take days or weeks to fully unfold. Now, with the immediacy of social media, news outlets, and online communities, miscalculations are exposed within minutes. When Republicans push a message that is misleading, hypocritical, or outright false, fact checks and viral responses quickly dismantle it, spreading faster than the original claim. This acceleration means that consequences are no longer delayed. They are instantaneous. The scheme does not even have time to settle before it collapses in plain view, leaving no opportunity for recovery. What was intended to control the narrative instead fuels outrage, satire, and widespread criticism. Another key dimension of the backfire effect is its psychological impact. The more aggressively a false or manipulative narrative is pushed, the more determined people become to resist it. Instead of convincing the public, Republicans find themselves hardening opposition and energizing critics. This is not only a failure of messaging but a reversal of intent. Rather than weakening the resolve of their opponents, schemes often strengthen it, creating new coalitions, sparking protests, or driving voters to the polls with renewed determination. The backlash becomes a force that Republicans cannot control, one born not from opposition strategy but from their own miscalculation. The consequences of these backfires extend beyond immediate embarrassment. They erode trust over time, creating a cumulative effect that damages long-term credibility. When schemes unravel, they leave behind a record of failure that voters, opponents, and even allies remember. Each collapse chips away at the foundation of authority, making future claims less convincing and future tactics more suspect. This erosion of credibility is perhaps the most damaging consequence of all. A single backfire may fade from headlines, but the pattern of repeated missteps builds a narrative of incompetence and dishonesty that no party can afford to carry. Republicans, in their pursuit of quick victories, often overlook this long-term cost, only to face it when they most need public trust. The backfire effect also demonstrates a deeper truth about politics. Authenticity and transparency are far more resilient than manipulation and spin. Attempts to distort reality may work in the short term, but reality has a way of asserting itself. When facts surface, when evidence contradicts rhetoric, and when lived experience disproves false claims, the truth becomes undeniable. Republicans who rely on schemes rather than substance often underestimate this resilience of truth. They gamble on the hope that people will be distracted or misled, but time and again, reality exposes their tactics, leaving them not only defeated but discredited. The instant karma they face is not mystical, it is the inevitable consequence of building strategies on shaky ground. What makes these backfires particularly powerful is their ability to expose hypocrisy. When Republicans take a strong stand on an issue, only to contradict themselves in practice, the exposure of that contradiction resonates deeply with the public. Hypocrisy fuels outrage because it reveals not just dishonesty but also contempt for the intelligence of voters. The backlash in these moments is not just about the policy or scheme itself, it is about the betrayal of trust. Voters may forgive mistakes, but they rarely forgive manipulation, and when hypocrisy is laid bare, the damage is severe. The very attempt to gain advantage transforms into a spectacle of dishonor, reinforcing the idea that karma does not delay. Ultimately, the backfire effect reveals the fragility of power when it is built on manipulation. Republicans who rely on schemes rather than substance find themselves caught in a cycle where each misstep accelerates their decline. The speed of modern media, the resilience of truth, the resistance of the public, and the inevitability of accountability all converge to create instant karma. This cycle not only weakens individual strategies but also undermines the larger credibility of the party, forcing it into a defensive posture again and again. The lesson is clear. In politics, as in life, schemes built on deception are unsustainable, and the backfire effect ensures that consequences are not only certain but swift. Accountability in real time is one of the most striking features of modern politics, where schemes and manipulations no longer go unnoticed or take years to unravel. In the current climate, the actions of Republicans provide a clear example of how quickly strategies meant to control narratives or gain advantage can spiral out of control, leaving those who initiated them exposed to immediate backlash. What once could be hidden behind layers of bureaucracy, filtered press coverage, or carefully crafted talking points is now laid bare for the public to witness almost instantly. Attempts to obscure the truth, silence opposition, or mislead the electorate now generate swift responses, often within minutes, as social media, investigative journalism, and grassroots movements mobilize to hold leaders accountable. This creates a form of instant karma, where accountability is no longer delayed but delivered in real time, intensifying the consequences of political missteps. Republicans who employ aggressive tactics often underestimate this reality, believing that traditional methods of political maneuvering still apply. They assume they can craft a narrative, repeat it enough times, and watch it gain traction without challenge. But the landscape has changed dramatically. Today, every claim, every piece of legislation, and every speech is dissected in real time. When contradictions emerge, when evidence is revealed, or when hypocrisy is exposed, the public no longer waits for official reports or election cycles to render judgment. Instead, the backlash unfolds immediately. A tweet, a viral video, or a leaked document can undo months of strategy, and the speed at which accountability is delivered leaves little room for recovery. The Republicans find themselves in a cycle of damage control that is never-ending because the mechanisms of exposure never sleep. The immediacy of accountability has also created a new relationship between politicians and the public. Voters are no longer passive recipients of information but active participants in shaping narratives. The backfire of Republican schemes is often amplified by ordinary citizens who use their voices online, in communities, and through activism to highlight contradictions and failures. This democratization of accountability means that no amount of money, no controlled media spin, and no party discipline can prevent the truth from reaching the public. Each time Republicans attempt to suppress dissent or manipulate perception, they risk igniting a wave of resistance that grows stronger precisely because it originates outside the control of traditional power structures. This dynamic is particularly evident when Republicans pursue strategies designed to silence or discredit critics. Instead of diminishing opposition, these efforts often galvanize it. By attempting to delegitimize voices that challenge them, Republicans unintentionally draw more attention to those very voices. This creates a paradox in which the effort to suppress opposition actually strengthens it, as people rally around the targeted individuals or causes. The real-time nature of accountability means that these backfires do not wait for the next election or the slow process of institutional checks. They unfold publicly, visibly, and with increasing intensity the more they are resisted. The result is that Republicans inadvertently accelerate the very outcomes they hope to prevent. Another important factor is that accountability in real time exposes patterns, not just isolated incidents. When a Republican scheme backfires, it becomes part of a larger narrative that critics and the public connect to previous failures. This creates a cumulative effect where each miscalculation does not stand alone but reinforces a broader perception of incompetence, dishonesty, or hypocrisy. The constant exposure of these patterns erodes credibility and builds momentum for opposition movements. The immediacy of information ensures that memories of past failures remain alive, ready to be reignited whenever a new scheme is exposed. Instead of controlling the narrative, Republicans find themselves trapped in a cycle of repeated accountability, each incident magnifying the failures of the last. The technology-driven nature of modern accountability also means that mistakes are preserved indefinitely. A misleading statement, a manipulative tactic, or a hypocritical policy decision does not disappear with the next news cycle. Screenshots, video clips, and archived records ensure that every action can be recalled and revisited whenever necessary. This permanence intensifies the consequences of real-time accountability because it prevents Republicans from rewriting history or moving on without addressing the damage. Every new scheme is evaluated in light of the past, every attempt at manipulation judged against a record of previous missteps. Accountability in this sense is not only immediate but also inescapable, a constant reminder that the public has both the memory and the tools to enforce consequences. What makes this form of accountability particularly devastating is that it often emerges from within their own ranks as well. Leaks, betrayals, and dissent from insiders accelerate the exposure of schemes before they even reach the public stage. When factions within the Republican Party clash, their internal disputes spill outward, providing critics with ammunition and undermining unity. Accountability in real time is not only external, delivered by opponents or the media, but internal, driven by divisions and power struggles that Republicans cannot fully control. This dual pressure ensures that schemes face scrutiny from every direction, leaving little room for survival. The public's appetite for accountability has also grown stronger, fueled by frustration with dishonesty and corruption. When Republicans attempt to bypass responsibility, the reaction is often more intense because people are increasingly unwilling to tolerate deception. The expectation of transparency and integrity has heightened, and the failure to meet those expectations creates backlash that spreads quickly. In this environment, attempts to obscure the truth are not seen as clever strategy but as insults to the intelligence of voters. Accountability in real time reflects not only the speed of modern communication but also the cultural shift toward demanding honesty and punishing those who try to evade it. The consequences of these backfires extend into elections, policy debates, and public trust. Each scheme that unravels in real time leaves behind voters who feel deceived, activists who are newly energized, and opponents who gain momentum. The inability to control accountability undermines the long-term goals of Republicans, making every miscalculation more costly than it might have been in the past. Instead of building power, these schemes chip away at it, replacing intended victories with setbacks that linger long after the immediate scandal has faded from headlines. The cycle becomes self-perpetuating. The more Republicans attempt to manipulate, the faster they are exposed, and the faster they are exposed, the weaker their position becomes. In this sense, accountability in real time is not just a reaction to political schemes, it is a defining feature of the modern era. The immediacy of exposure, the permanence of records, the democratization of information, and the heightened public demand for honesty all converge to create an environment where schemes cannot survive as they once did. For Republicans, this means that every action carries the risk of instant backlash, every strategy the possibility of immediate collapse. The pursuit of short-term advantage is constantly undermined by the long-term consequences of being held accountable the very moment a misstep occurs. Lessons from failure in politics reveal truths that are often overlooked in the pursuit of power, and Republicans have provided a vivid case study of how schemes designed for quick victories can collapse and become powerful reminders of what not to do. When a strategy backfires, the consequences are not limited to the immediate embarrassment or loss of momentum. They also serve as warnings about the fragility of tactics that rely on manipulation rather than genuine leadership. These failures carry lessons that stretch beyond partisan lines, exposing the risks of overconfidence, the dangers of ignoring public sentiment, and the inevitable downfall of choosing short-term gains over long-term stability. By analyzing these moments of collapse, we see how the very flaws that Republicans try to disguise become magnified, and how each miscalculation reinforces the importance of foresight, transparency, and accountability. One of the clearest lessons from these failures is that manipulation cannot substitute for substance. Republicans often rely on flashy messaging, strategic outrage, or procedural maneuvers to score quick points against opponents, but when these approaches unravel, they reveal the emptiness at their core. Voters may be momentarily distracted by rhetoric, but over time, they notice when real issues are ignored. The collapse of schemes highlights the cost of prioritizing optics over solutions, reminding politicians that sustainable success requires substance, not just performance. Failure in this sense becomes a teacher, exposing the inadequacy of superficial tactics and demonstrating that the public's demand for real answers cannot be postponed indefinitely. Another lesson lies in the inevitability of exposure. In today's digital world, every decision leaves a footprint, and every scheme carries the risk of being revealed. Republicans who attempt to conceal motives or disguise intentions often discover that secrets do not remain hidden for long. The backfires they experience underscore the truth that transparency, whether voluntary or forced, is unavoidable. Learning from these failures means recognizing that trust is built on openness, and that attempting to deceive or manipulate the public will only accelerate collapse. Politicians who fail to internalize this lesson repeat the same mistakes, falling into cycles of scandal and accountability that weaken their credibility. The failures also highlight the critical importance of understanding public sentiment. Republicans often miscalculate by assuming that people will accept narratives simply because they are delivered with confidence, but the backlash to these schemes shows otherwise. The public is increasingly resistant to being misled, and when they recognize manipulation, their response is swift and unforgiving. This teaches a powerful lesson about the necessity of listening rather than dictating, engaging with citizens rather than lecturing them. Schemes collapse because they underestimate the intelligence and awareness of the electorate, and each failure reinforces the reality that political power is fragile when it ignores the people it seeks to govern. Failures further demonstrate the long-term consequences of short-term thinking. Republicans may score temporary victories with certain schemes, but when those victories collapse, the damage to credibility and trust often outweighs the benefits. The lesson here is that sacrificing integrity for immediate gain is unsustainable. Over time, these collapses accumulate, creating a narrative of dishonesty and incompetence that becomes impossible to escape. Each failure adds to a record that opponents can exploit, that voters can remember, and that allies can question. The pursuit of instant advantage ends up eroding the very foundation of long-term success, leaving Republicans weaker and less trusted with every misstep. Another profound lesson is that failure often exposes hypocrisy in ways that are impossible to recover from. When Republicans take strong public positions but are later revealed to act in contradiction to those positions, the backlash is not only political but moral. Hypocrisy resonates deeply because it violates trust and insults the intelligence of voters. Each failure rooted in hypocrisy reinforces the lesson that consistency matters, and that credibility depends on aligning words with actions. For politicians, this is perhaps the hardest lesson to accept because it demands discipline and integrity in an environment that often rewards expedience. Yet when schemes collapse under the weight of hypocrisy, the damage is long-lasting and severe, offering a clear example of why credibility is indispensable. Failures also provide lessons about the shifting power of media and communication. Republicans often design schemes with the assumption that they can control narratives through traditional outlets, but backfires show that narratives now belong to the public as much as to politicians. Viral content, fact-checking, and grassroots activism ensure that stories evolve beyond the control of party leaders. The lesson here is that old methods of narrative control are obsolete, and adaptation is necessary. Ignoring this reality ensures more backfires, as Republicans continue to misjudge the speed and reach of modern communication. The collapse of their schemes illustrates the futility of clinging to outdated strategies and the necessity of evolving to meet the expectations of a digitally connected society. Another significant lesson is the value of humility. Failure often occurs because Republicans act with overconfidence, assuming their schemes are foolproof and their positions unassailable. But when these efforts collapse, they serve as humbling reminders that arrogance blinds decision-making. The lesson is that humility is not a weakness but a safeguard against miscalculation. Leaders who recognize their limitations, anticipate consequences, and prepare for accountability are less likely to fall victim to the same pitfalls. Republicans' repeated failures demonstrate the danger of ignoring humility, showing how arrogance creates the very conditions for collapse. Failures also expose the resilience of truth. Attempts to distort or conceal reality may succeed temporarily, but when schemes collapse, they reaffirm that truth eventually prevails. This lesson resonates beyond partisanship, highlighting the futility of trying to rewrite reality in an age where information is widely accessible. For Republicans, each collapse becomes a reminder that truth cannot be indefinitely suppressed, and that those who attempt to do so invite even harsher judgment when reality inevitably emerges. The failure of schemes reinforces the principle that truth is not only stronger than manipulation but also more enduring. Finally, these failures teach the importance of integrity as a long-term strategy. Schemes backfire because they are built on deception, hypocrisy, or short-term gain, while integrity creates stability that withstands scrutiny. Republicans who repeatedly rely on schemes rather than genuine solutions show how unsustainable dishonesty is in practice. Each collapse becomes a case study in the cost of abandoning integrity, serving as a warning not only to their own party but to all of politics. The lesson is not abstract but deeply practical. Failure is the inevitable result of choosing expedience over principle, manipulation over authenticity, and arrogance over humility. The backfires Republicans face are not random misfortunes but direct consequences of ignoring these lessons, and each failure makes the next one more predictable.